And so most anecdotal evidence is about weather that we hear when we're out and about visiting with people. However, weather events that have changed enough over time to be noticed by people and talked about are related to overall climate change and are a great place to start our conversations. So, as a range specialist who works out in the field with ranchers, small acreage landowners, people around town, I hear a lot of conversations, people talking about what they've just noticed, felt, seen. And so this can be people who've lived in the county a very long time or people who are relatively new. And so a few of those that I've heard is, I'm out with a rancher on the landscape and he says to me, this creek used to run year round and now it's bone dry by August. So that's something that they have noticed that's just a change in their world. Cyanobacteria, or that blue-green algae like you see here, was something people never even had to think about in Sublette County, but it's creeping north and we're starting to see it in the southern end of the county and a lot more frequently. Another one is, man, I never remember it being this windy. Why is it so darn windy all the time? And everyone's nodding, yep, we're all tired of the wind. And so I want to open it up to you guys. What do you notice? I would love to hear from you. What are some things in your lives? It can be in relation to anything. What have you noticed, felt, seen? What are your anecdotal observations?
I think the wind and the later of the seasons. I mean, we've had snow into May
Okay.
this year, and that's usually weird. We're usually all at one crystal and getting ready to start coming out. And I was told when I got here that traditionally high water is at the 15th of June, 10th to the 15th, and that's getting sometimes pushed back later or not. It doesn't happen. So we just get a trickle out. So
Yeah.
This is better than last year, but not much.
Yeah, and I just had someone talking about that beforehand, like, man, the creeks seem really low still, or, we're getting into that, but maybe we don't see as big of a flush. And we'll talk about what that is, what that looks like a little bit throughout this presentation. So anyone else? That's a great observation. Yeah?
I noticed that my yard is often blown clean of snow. There's not enough snow to stick during the winter time like it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I've only been here almost 7 years.
Okay.
It seems like 2018, 17, 18 was our last hard winter.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people. Some of the jokes I've heard around town, and we have lots of people moving in from out of state, and we were hoping we'd have a bad winter to maybe soften that a little bit, but we can't drive people out anymore because our winters have been pretty mild. Yeah, I moved here, that 16-17 winter, and Alex and I were like, where did we move? Because that winter was intense. We had to buy a plow, but yeah, it looks different, and we're going to see those oscillations through time, but it's the general lows or the general highs that we'll talk about. So anybody else have one they want to share?
In passing, I live out on 40 Rod, and that's not someplace anybody would have ever lived by choice. There was so much snow, and so you get stuff off.
Yeah.
You could drive your snow machines over fences, and that hasn't happened for a long time.
Yeah, so just amounts of snow, right? We're just seeing changes or when it comes too. So timing, perfect. And so I guess, yeah, we'll jump into some of those things, but first I'm going to start with a video that talks about the Colorado River Basin, which is where we are, and kind of our outlook on what the future holds. So we'll start with this.
Water is a crucial building block for life, for farming, for food, and for showers. Often water comes from far away. For example, over half of Southern California's water is pumped out of the Colorado River. It is then transported up and over a mountain range to be used in cities and farms. But as rainfall and temperatures change, scientists are seeing a mega drought emerge in the American West. And much of that long-term drought is centered right over the Colorado River, which means giant cities like LA and rural farms alike could see a strain on their water supply. In this episode, we'll learn why this drought is so bad and find out what lessons we can learn from people who've lived in the Southwest for thousands of years. A drainage basin is an area where precipitation collects and runs into a particular body of water. The basin in the Colorado River spans 7 states and 2 countries. 40 million people count on its water. But what happens when rivers dry up and the water you're counting on doesn't come? To understand, I first asked water and drought scientist Brad Udall what's going on.
In 2000, a drought began that now, 20 years later, is the most severe drought since gauges were installed on the river in 1906 in some places. The flow is down about 20%.
Drought is usually defined as a period of abnormally low rainfall leading to a shortage of water. But Brad told me that this drought is a bit different. That's because while rain is down, that doesn't fully account for the low water levels.
We now actually have a new term for this. It's a hot drought. So higher temperatures dry out the earth. And what we're finding is that higher temperatures lead to greater evaporation in all its forms. And that evaporation is the cause of this decline in flow.
In other words, as temperatures increase over time, the process of evaporation takes more water away from rivers, lakes, and snow-capped mountains. This helps explain why river flow in the Colorado Basin is down 20% despite precipitation only being down by 5%. And droughts do end, but according to many scientists, waiting for rain in this case is probably not a good idea.
You know, the term drought implies some kind of return to normal at some point. Drought implies temporary. And most scientists nowadays have started talking about the aridification of the West, meaning a more permanent move to a dry state.
And so, one of the big things I wanted to focus on in that was evaporation. And so, that's going to answer a lot of our questions about flows, about what water comes to us in lower elevations from the mountains. And so, Wyoming's climate is largely determined by its mid-latitude location in the interior of the North American continent, far from oceanic moisture sources. While its frequent proximity to the jet stream exposes it to these periodic storm systems, its lack of easy access to moisture sources leads to mostly our semi-arid climate that we're all very used to. So what does this mean? Well, we're seeing an increase in that evaporation of the water we do have. But it's not only just one of these things I'm going to talk about by itself. It's this combination that's considered this, that kind of creates this hot drought that we're in. It's a combination of many factors. So what do we know? Well, we know that when and where temperatures are increasing most and when and where precip falls and melts shapes the pulse of life and commerce in Wyoming. And that pulse is changing in ways that indicate significant disruptions. We know that climate trends are showing us that the highest elevations are warming fastest. We know that snowpack and glacial water banks are a primary driver of our annual spring runoff, and spring runoff helps drive large portions of Wyoming's biological health and economy. Winter and spring precip is projected to increase with heavier spring precipitation combined with a shift from snow to rain. And so who in here has heard of rain on snow events? That terminology. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Those rain on snow events can actually increase our potential for flooding. They can overwhelm infrastructure downstream, and so that's a very big concern when we know we're getting precip at those times, but our warmer temperatures create snow, can take snow to rain instead. And then those extreme events in the future are affecting Sublette County residents. Our statewide annual mean temperature is also increasing by 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit from the 1920s to 2020, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then increases in evaporation rates due to spring temperatures may increase the rate of soil moisture loss. So this is another really, really big one for our plants, our rangelands here in Sublette County. And then it's going to make those droughts even more intense as they naturally occur on the landscape. We'll talk about what that looks like as well. So how is climate change affecting you? Well, snowpack decline and glacier recession mean there is less water moving down through the watershed and available for a variety of uses, including hay production and other agricultural uses that are very, very important in Sublette County. Summer is not only hotter, it is also drier. That shift to hotter and drier summer conditions is happening all over the state, including Sublette County, and I'll show some figures to talk to that later. While increases in temperature don't appear to be reflected in significant changes in precip, the temperature increases are impacting water resources through that early snowmelt we talked about, faster runoff, and that greater evaporation that all kind of coincide together, all of which enhance drought. This in turn can increase wildfire intensity and frequency. So I guess I'm just going to pick everyone's brain. What do people remember about July and August the last couple years in Sublette County? What are some big things that stand out to you? Smoke, right? We couldn't see our mountains for almost the entire month of August last year. And you know, I've heard people say, is this our new norm? And it's hard to say because we are not the only place experiencing these intense drought conditions. We know that the Northwest was heavily on fire last year. So whether these fires are local, you know, like the Roosevelt that we had a few years back, or, you know, abroad, we are still seeing air quality issues, visibility issues related to smoke coming from everywhere. And so this is a nationwide concern as well. So among Wyoming seasons, the annual springtime mean temp trend is the steepest. That's that positive 2.9 degrees Fahrenheit. This results in that earlier accelerated melt and presents a myriad of challenges that we've talked about, like the rain on snow events, flooding. Another big one that people don't maybe think about as much is the humid climate migration. So this is already happening. According to a recent study in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the planet could see a greater temperature increase in the next 50 years than it did in the last 6,000 years. By 2070, the kind of extremely hot zones like the Sahara Desert, places like that we think about, that now cover less than 1% of the Earth's land surface could cover nearly a fifth of the land surface, potentially placing 1 of every 3 people alive outside of that climate niche where humans have survived for thousands of years and will survive into the future. So a more recent, and I guess one that might hit home a little bit more, is in 2017, Hurricane Maria wiped out thousands of homes and businesses in Puerto Rico, which caused a massive migration to the mainland United States. And so more than 120,000 individuals and families sought refuge in mainland United States. Climate experts expect some 13 million coastal residents in the U.S. to be displaced by the end of this century. And that has to do with water level rise in the oceans is going to at some point overtake land that's now available to people, which means they're going to shift towards the middle of the U.S. And as you all know, we are one of the most landlocked states here in the middle of the U.S. And so these things do affect Wyoming. We're seeing massive land migrations already based on just climate. So our highest elevations are warming fastest. What this can do is our tree line can actually shift higher. So as higher temperatures and a longer season without snow on the ground, our subalpine fir communities can actually shift to higher altitudes and grow at those higher elevations. This means that the extent of those alpine tundra ecosystems are extremely important in our area, and especially for specific species and wildlife, they're going to be threatened. They're going to be out of some of those habitat niches that they need. Rising temps and recent droughts have killed many trees also by drying out soils, which increases that risk of forest fires we talked about, but also increases their susceptibility to insect outbreaks, which we know do take a lot of trees in alpine communities as well. Wyoming's mountain ranges also contain 1,500 glaciers. As the climate warms, most of these glaciers will retreat and some could disappear altogether. Areas that are no longer covered by glaciers may accumulate snowpack still. They're still high enough, but they're not going to hold on to that year-round like they currently do, which means that, during the hottest, driest parts down watershed, like where we are, or in the Colorado River Basin, we need that longevity in the mountains to provide water year-round. And with the receding glaciers and receding snowpack, it's hard to know what the outlook on that is going to be. Our snowpack is in danger. That's simple as I can put it. Projected rising temperatures will raise the snow line, the average lowest elevation at which snow falls. So this will increase the likelihood that precip will fall as rain rather than snow, which reduces that ability for the snowpack to store water, particularly at lower mountain elevations that are now on the margins of reliable snowpack accumulation. So there's kind of a zone right now that still holds on, but it's right on that edge, and those are the ones we're going to see going quickest. Higher spring temperatures will also result in earlier melting of the snowpack, further decreasing water availability during those dry summer months like I'm talking about. And we're so close to the headwaters here, you know, which is nice for us, but, you know, if you think back to the video, those places that still rely on water that starts right here in Sublette County, you know, are losing more and more water as it gets down watershed to some of those, you know, larger cities that rely on this as their sole water supply. So with that potential of flooding, you get more surface to atmosphere evaporation because water's sitting there, but it also means that there's a shrinking window to benefit from the water that we do receive. And so we have reservoirs and irrigation systems and canals and ditches in this county, as you all see as you drive around and look at hay fields. Water's on them right now. We're seeing people start to flood irrigate. But what's happening is without that like ample and steady supply of water, if we get that more intense, short-lived water runoff, it can actually overwhelm irrigation and storage capacities. And so, meaning that we can't, as producers or people in Sublette County, utilize water and make beneficial use of it while it's here because we're overwhelmed by it. We have to sometimes let it go. It's actually hurting infrastructure, taking out infrastructure, and we don't know how to harness its power anymore if it's coming all at once. So interestingly enough, you know, a lot of models predicting into the future show that our annual precip and the number of 1-inch extreme precipitation events has been trending upward since 2000. And it looks as though moving into the future that we are going to see an increase in Wyoming in just that, you know, March to May precip, you know, compared to the middle of the 20th century. But that increase doesn't necessarily mean anything if it's paired with those higher temperatures that I'm talking about. Because again, rain can fall all at once, but if the temperatures are high while this is happening, we're going to lose so much to evaporation that, you know, this may not actually make a difference for Wyoming being in the semi-arid area we are. And then, you know, with these droughts that are happening against that, again, that wildfire risk increases to more frequent and more severe. So another thing I want to talk about are what's considered normal. And so our normals have changed. Normals are baseline data sets describing average monthly and annual conditions over the most recent 3 full decades. The current PRISM normals, where we get, you know, a lot of this data from, cover a period of 1991 to 2020, so pretty recently. So these are the most recent 3 decades. So new normals are still showing an increase in temperature for our region and a change in when precipitation falls and how much. So it's really when and how much, the big changes. So really our local stations are confirming that we are seeing a shift in when we receive precip, not necessarily a decline in precip overall. So a lot of ours, so this graph actually shows, these are all a bunch of sites within the Bridger-Teton. And I'm just going to circle the ones that are important. So we're seeing an increase in that February. So when you're talking about snow sticking around longer, we're seeing an increase in a February, you know, at a 95% confidence interval. Our bars don't overlap. So that's a significant change between the last 3 decades and the current 3 decades. We're seeing that in July, it's a lot drier than it used to be. So there's that hot drought. During that time when things are already warmer, just based on the fact that it's July in Wyoming and it's summer, we're seeing less precip then and those higher temps. So those 2 things combined are not great heading into the fall. But lucky for us, we do see a slight increase in our September kind of fall range. And so I don't know if you guys remember last year, but we did have those weird late September and October rains accompanied with higher temperatures. I was seeing things blooming out there in late October that was the first time they had gotten enough warmth and enough moisture to pop, which unfortunately is not when we want things blooming or seeding out here in the county. And so it's really, even the plants were a little thrown off by some of this, you know, when we're receiving moisture. And so really, you know, when we see, and then I guess there's the next one, sorry, October has the same kind of thing. So we have like a little bit of an increase in the fall.
So the dark ones are what year?
So the dark ones are the new normals. These are the old normals. So February 1991 to 2020 and 1981 to 2010.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I guess I could have flipped them. It's kind of confusing, but yeah, the blue are the newest. The blue is what we're in now.
Okay, I just can't see.
Okay, gotcha. The light blue, yeah, the light blue is the older normals.
Okay.
Yep, no problem. All right. So really, all these things I've talked about are compounding factors that put our soil moisture in danger. The highest multi-year averages for summer and winter average temperatures have occurred since 1995, with summer average temperatures during the early 2000s and 2010s exceeding the extreme heat of the 1930s Dust Bowl. Since 2000, the number of very cold days in Wyoming has generally been below average as well, indicative of a warming in the region. Warming temperatures mixed with that famous Wyoming wind we all know so well leads to that increased loss of soil moisture throughout the year, especially in spring and summer when it is most important for plant growth. And then those precipitation patterns, increased temperatures, hot, dry winds all come together to have that negative effect on soil moisture, which in turn directly impacts the plant growth across our county and state, especially just out in our rangelands that don't have that irrigation potential or supplemental water coming to them. So what does drought look like moving into summer here? So from 1999 to 2008, large portion of the states experienced drought conditions. The state then experienced several years of above average precip until about 2012. Who here remembers 2012? What do you remember about that year? I feel like everyone talks about that year. It was dry, right? It was one of the drier years on record since pretty much 1895 when records began. Yeah, so by October 2012 of that year, almost 90% of the state of Wyoming was in severe drought. The drought, along with higher temperatures and high winds, resulted in one of Wyoming's worst wildfire seasons. And this wasn't just in Wyoming. I was in Nebraska at the time, working for Nebraska Game and Parks. And I remember being on some of the biggest ponderosa pine fires I've ever been on in the northwest part of Nebraska as well. That was one of our worst wildfire seasons as well. So it wasn't, I mean, it was Midwest, the West. It was really everywhere at this point. More than 350,000 acres burned in the state of Wyoming that year by the fall. Another severe wildfire season occurred in 2020. By October 2020, about 60% of the state was in severe drought and almost 340,000 acres had burned. And so this map here, sorry, I guess I'll go back one, maybe. It's gonna let me. No. Okay, well that was a drought monitor map. You can get those at any time online that kind of show the outlook. So you could see kind of right there in our little basin, we were red. We're in the severe drought zone leading into summer already. I mean, that can always change, right? We're still receiving that spring moisture. I mean, this weekend looks rainy and cold for Memorial Day, which, woo, right? Like we're all excited about it. Yes, let's get some rain on the ground. I mean, I'm going to go south and play by the gorge where it's warmer, but I'm excited that Sublette County is getting rain. But you can get those at any time, and it's important to understand what the outlook is. It means a lot for what we do here every day. And so another thing I just wanted to touch on quick is recently there was a Greater Yellowstone Climate Assessment completed that does include, this area. So we're down here, this upper green area. There's Pinedale right there. And according to a recent Wildfire article, that kind of picked out some of the main points, I just wanted to show that this coincides with pretty much everything I've been talking about. They're finding the exact same things. We're going to see an increase in temperature, 0.31% Fahrenheit per decade, that our snowpack is shrinking. Yep, they found the exact same thing in the Yellowstone region. The drier conditions make us more prone to fire. The mature white bark pine trees are dying off. Remember, I'm talking about, as temperatures rise, these trees are meant to survive at certain elevations, at certain temperatures, certain precips, and with that changing, it's causing some die-off of trees. The region is more prone to invasive species outbreaks because of that same exact reason. Trees are stressed. And the region is more, so that changes in timing and range of snowmelt are affecting fish spawning and the health of aquatic systems because it has to do with water temperature and it has to do with when those flows are happening because fish very, very much depend on specific flows at specific times that keep water cool. And then those rising temps are affecting even food availability for songbirds, things we don't think about for a lot of wildlife species that depend on certain flushes of certain things, you know, at certain times on the landscape. And if those things are dependent upon weather and precip as well, you can see that all of those changes affect everything up the food chain when it comes to wildlife as well. So the fact is, climate change and drought is affecting Sublette County and you currently and will into the future. So while men argue about it, nature is going to continue to act. So public opinion about climate change is an important influence on decision making about policies to reduce it or prepare for the impacts. But American opinions vary widely depending on where people live. Most Americans land in one of these categories you see up here. It can be very difficult to engage with people who land in the disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive categories. It doesn't mean that people who land in those categories aren't worth talking to with, but it just means the success rate or ability to educate does decrease the farther on that end of the spectrum people land. So with that, let's get into a little bit of social science regarding where Wyoming sits when it comes to our warming climate. So these following Yale climate maps that you guys are going to see, the climate opinion maps, are based on data through the fall of 2021, so very, very recent data. So public opinion about global warming, and I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. I've just showed you guys a ton of data. This is, you know, not meant to be political at all. Global warming, climate change, warming climate, they're all going to be used kind of interchangeably in here. So public opinion about global warming is an important influence on that decision making like I talked about. So Yale has used a variety of methods to kind of come up with these maps, including large-scale surveys of people, modeling to estimate public opinion, and also demographic information, voting information, all kinds of, you know, people demographic information for these states. So, according to the Yale climate opinion maps, 58% of Wyoming believes that global warming is happening, so a little over half. The estimated percent of adults who think global warming is mostly caused by humans is 44%, so a little below half. 57% of adults think global warming will harm future generations. So that's pretty big. I would say I'm in agreement there, absolutely. But only 33% think that global warming will affect them personally. So this is a little concerning to me, just because we've just talked about how it's here, it's already affecting us, and I think the concern is if you have that perception, you're not likely to maybe do as much about it. If you think, you know, we tend to do things when we know it's affecting us personally, and so that one's a little concerning because it might cause people not to take needed steps or have those discussions moving forward about what it means for their operation or, you know, the county itself. Estimated percent of adults who discuss global warming at least occasionally is about 32% in Wyoming. And I get that this can be hard to measure because a lot of us, like the anecdotal stuff, we talk about weather. A lot of weather and climate change are very strongly linked, however. So I kind of say we could use this as like a gateway drug to talk about the changing climate. So we can start by talking about weather, those things we've noticed, but hopefully that would lead to solutions to these other things that we can talk about that are more related to weather and can inform us about that drying and changing climate, or maybe makes us, you know, read more or research more and educate ourselves more. So then some Sublette County statistics. Only 40% of Sublette County believes that climate change is affecting them personally, which I talked about is a little worrisome. However, policy support is relatively high in Sublette County. So this shows we understand and support research into renewable energy sources. We're interested in it. And we believe in tax rebates that could incentivize that energy efficiency. And so these are good things. These are positive things that we can capitalize on for views moving forward. So again, the fact is climate change and drought is affecting Sublette County and you. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's time to respond. Americans and others are responding all over the world based on their very specific ways in which climate change is affecting them. and their parts of the country or world. So what could this look like in Sublette County? Well, let's dive in a little bit. So really the big takeaways are be proactive instead of reactive. The magnitude of changes that we're going to see into the future based on modeling are going to exceed what we've already experienced in the past. So if we keep taking information from the past and creating our decisions off of what we know, it's not going to be enough because things are accelerating quickly. So we need to, make sure we're meeting needs moving forward. So you got to understand effects on you personally and create plans for what that means for you and what you do daily moving forward. So I think talking about it is really big as well. We need to gain an understanding of how climate change is affecting Sublette County and having those informed discussions with others so that we can all navigate a drying future better together. And then act now. Don't wait to take steps to make changes and prepare for what the future holds. It's now. Now's the time. So what could this look like? So for an example, for ranchers or any agricultural producer or even small acreage landowners, the Wyoming Department of Agriculture partnered with Right Risk Management to put on a drought contingency plan webinar in 2014. These presentations are available to you to go through at your own pace, and this is a great introduction to drought in Wyoming and how to prepare for drought moving forward. It's always good to see what is predicted for drought, so there's that drought model up there again, in your specific area ahead of time so that you can understand what the outlook is for the next growing season that we're coming into. There are many resources available to you where long-term outlooks can help you prepare for the future. Wyoming's drought website also has monthly webinars to explain the conditions and other great resources for you to make wise decisions about the upcoming grazing season. A drought plan, like a contingency plan, includes strategies that you implement before, during, and after drought. So it helps you think through the feasibility, impact, and the cost-benefit ratio of each potential management option. And it helps you identify the strategies that will work best for your specific operation. Your list of reasonable options for this year may look completely different than next year, because as you know, year to year, these things can be very different. We're seeing a lot of changes and big swings in climate and weather. And so, it would just need to help you consider whether it moves you towards your goals or whether it's feasible in light of your ranch inventory. So a ranch inventory is something that can happen during a conservation planning timeframe. And so agencies like the Natural Resources Conservation Service and SCCD do conservation plans with private landowners. And what this is it's a baseline inventory of what's on your ranch, your current stocking rates, your current forage production. Understanding all of that really can help you better understand what that means for drought contingency moving forward. Because if you don't know what you have, you don't know how to make changes if the climate, makes you or pushes you in that direction. So it kind of gives you an inventory baseline so that you know how to make decisions moving forward. To plan for drought is a win-win for everyone, whether you own horses, sheep, cattle, whether it's a small hobby farm or a large ranch operation. And like I said, SCCD can help you prepare for drought and help you make a plan, bring you the resources that you need to be sustainable so that all of our rangeland ecosystems can be healthy for future generations. And so this presentation will be online with these links so that people can view them at different times, go in, click around at your own pace, watch those webinars. It's a great resource, so I definitely recommend spending some time in there post presentation. So gardeners, small acreage landowners, homeowners, what does this look like for you guys? I'm one of these people. I'm not a rancher, but I live, on an acre out in Barger, and this stuff means a lot to me. So, some big things for people who are gardening. So water your plants deeply. On average, plants prefer 1 to 1.5 inches of moisture per week. In a drought, this may be pretty hard to come by. And so to prepare your plants, watering deeply once a week is better practice than watering a lot with less water. Deep watering actually helps establish stronger roots that reach down further into the soil profile, which can help sustain plants during hot or dry times when you're unable to water or maybe you're trying to cut back on watering. It also means that it keeps more moisture in the soil, which can help with that evaporation that we keep talking about, the reoccurring theme of evaporation. Weed all the time, as much as you possibly can. Here I am preaching this up here, and I need to weed at my house so bad. I've got stuff everywhere, and I just need to like take a night to do it. But be vigilant, because these weeds are competing for resources with all the things that you care about, that you planted. So that water that's scarce, the sunlight, and those soil nutrients, they're competing. So the more you weed, the better you're, setting your plants up, and they're going to need less. Anytime that you can use, a drip system or a soaker hose to water instead of spraying water in the air is always going to be better. They'll provide water directly to the soil and the plant root systems. They greatly reduce water runoff and that evaporation, and they can keep foliage dry, because there's sometimes when you have plants in a greenhouse situation, if you have foliage wet all the time, the leaves, it can actually cause fungal outbreaks because there's just not enough airflow. So this is especially important in a greenhouse situation or a high tunnel situation. But mulch whenever you can as well, because again, applying that 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top is going to keep soil moisture in. And then reduce or stop applying herbicide and pesticides whenever you can, because these things can actually burn leaves if it's too hot or dry, and can actually affect health of plants if put on when things are too hot. And so the next one is for anyone and everyone. What does this look like for anyone else who didn't feel like they fit in one of those two categories, but also everyone? You are far more powerful than you think, so really just act accordingly. I think we all need to. We can educate ourselves, because knowledge is power, and so really find out what your local and state governments are doing to address climate change and drought, and be a part of that conversation. We all need to be a part of the conversation. Come up with long-term strategies to not only cope with climate change and drought, but also make changes now that will affect the trajectory moving forward. Like I said, it's time to act now. Reduce your consumption all around, whether that be water or energy. I mean, understanding your footprint as one human can be a pretty humbling experience, and there's lots of resources out there to help you better understand what, one American's footprint is. Understand the changes occurring with our climate in Wyoming and abroad. Talk about it. Be a catalyst for change and proactive, so that we can take measures in Sublette County moving forward. So let's all work together. And so I wanted to end with this quote by Leonardo DiCaprio. But clean air and water and a livable climate are inalienable human rights, and solving this crisis is not a question of politics, it is our moral obligation, if admittedly a daunting one. And so with that, I would love to take some questions, if you have any. Thank you.